Welcome to Inside the Firm, a podcast dedicated to small business owners and hosted by entrepreneurs, Alex Gore and Lance Cayko. Each week, they take you on their journey of how to start, run, and grow a business by bringing you inside their architecture and real estate development firm. Get a behind-the-scenes tour of how these business leaders manage their clients and foster company culture while creating new and innovative projects. And now your hosts, Alex Gore and Lance Cayko.
No pressure.
Welcome to ARCAST 2020. The idea for this, obviously, because of COVID-19, the architectural conference that the AIA puts on every year was canceled. It was supposed to be right in my backyard this year. I think Cormac was going to come sleep over. We were going to have a ARCASpeak sleepover. Different rooms, and it would just drive into the conference every day. And so that obviously didn't happen. And so our idea was to do what we did last year and have some fun, pretend like the convention's still going on. That's why we've got these beautiful backgrounds right here. See, there's Lance, there's Mark. This was from last year when we did the same thing. And get under the big red A at the ARCAT booth. And so that's why it's called ARCAST, because we're podcasters at the ARCAT booth. And bring the R4 podcast together. We've got ARCASpeak, Entree Architect, Inside the Firm, and Spaces Podcast. And we're streaming from 5 different locations, but all together under the big red A today. And we're having guests join us, and we're going to talk about architecture, and we're going to talk about what's going on in the world, and we're going to talk with some really cool people, some leaders in the industry, along with these other fine hosts as well. And hopefully it'll just be a fun thing to do, and people can watch and just get a little bit of entertainment, but also get a little bit of insight into what's going on in architecture and what leaders are thinking and doing in and across the country. So welcome everybody to ARCAST 2020. And we thought we'd go around the world here and just talk about, maybe everybody do a little intro. I will just start right now just because I'm already talking. So I'm Evan Troxel. I'm one half of the ARCASpeak podcast, arcaspeakpodcast.com. You can find the shows there. And we love talking about architecture. Our most recent episodes, we're just totally nerding out on architecture and experience architecture because we can't do that right now. So we've been having fun with that with Cormac and I. So Cormac, why don't you take it from there so that you can follow up on the second half of the ARCASpeak podcast here.
Yeah, so I'm the second half of the ARCASpeak podcast, and I am in the Washington, D.C. area in Bethesda, Maryland, and enjoying not having to commute an hour back and forth each day. So that's the one plus, but yeah. Let me just hand it off to someone else to introduce themselves.
I'll go. I'm Alex Gore from Inside the Firm. I'm 3/4 of Inside the Firm.
Yes.
And I am I'm the remaining quarter. And am I the co-host? How does it work?
I make up a new thing.
Sidekick.
Sidekick.
Mic man. I was a mic man for a while. Mm-hmm.
And hey, Cormac, your volume was a little bit low. If you bring it closer.
Eat the mic.
Oh, I had to. I should have joined the tech review in
the tech check.
I clearly am having a little bit of difficulty here switching from my Mac to a PC. So, of course, everything that that we need, IT is blocking. So
it sounds much better now.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So, Lance, do you want to introduce yourself? You just said you were a quarter of the show.
I'm the co-host and Alex's business partner at F9 Productions and Inside the Firm. And we're glad to be back. We were with you guys last year at in person. We can't be there obviously this year, so I think we're making the best out of it. So there you go.
I'm just waving to a listener who texted me.
All right. Demetrius, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I am Dimitrius Lynch, 1/3 of Spaces Podcast. I have 2 other hosts, Michelle and Jason, who are not with us, not here today.
and Spaces Podcast, we discuss architecture, specifically spaces, and kind of how society has evolved and impacted how we design and build our spaces. And we sort of break down the walls between each little sliver of our building industry and try and highlight all the different components that people bring to creating a space. I think that covers my intro.
All right. I am Mark LePage. I'm the founder of Entre Architect, the host of Entre Architect Podcast. We talk about business, try to help small firms build better businesses. And we recently launched Gable Media, which is a new multimedia network that is dedicated to the AEC industries. And we are empowering leaders in AEC to build podcasts and videos and that kind of thing. And
share their expertise.
Yeah. And so you can go check that out at gablemedia.com. And we have some news too, if you want to jump into that and talk a little bit about that as well.
Me?
Yeah, go ahead, Dimitrius. But actually, let me just also add to Dimitrius's introduction. He is the creative director at Gable Media. And so much of the new content that's coming out of Gable Media, like Build Your Brand podcast and the new show that was launched yesterday, Evelyn Lee and Janine Chastain with Practice Disrupted, the sounds coming out of that, the mixing and the quality that's coming out of those shows is all due to Dimitrius. The hosts are doing a fantastic job, but Dimitrius is doing a lot of editing and producing and doing some really high quality work over there. So.
Yeah, a lot of fantastic content coming out because I get to hear all of this before the rest of the world in editing and sort of crafting some of this stuff. Great conversations talking about, the future of the profession, the business side of the profession. And then can I disclose our upcoming show?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't see why not.
Yeah, then we got a new show coming.
Next week.
Yeah, on Tuesday.
It's launching, yeah.
And he can probably speak to it better than I can, but it is called TRXL. It's the Troxel Podcast. So Evan is hosting his own individual podcast that's going to focus on technology, the design technology that's coming out and really changing the profession. So, Evan, you want to add some details to it?
Yeah, so Mark and I recently recorded a little intro to that, like a 20-minute teaser or something about just talking about what the show's about. And it's really is just what you said, Dimitrius. It's how technology is changing our profession and the different people who are involved in actually doing that. So it's not just talking about tools. It's not just talking about workflows. It's actually talking about the thinking that goes behind implementing these and where the profession's going. So really excited to do it. They're long-form conversations. Our goal is to put out an episode every week, and we're just having a lot of fun and allowing others to kind of be a fly on the wall during these conversations. And they tend to go all over the place, and that's really the point, is just to have you learn more about the guest, you learn more about me, you learn more about technology, you learn more about architecture, and that's really what the purpose of the show is. I'm really excited to do it.
Yeah, it sounds really good. Also, the other news is that ARCAST and Spaces Podcast, along with Entre Architect, it's all part of Gable Media. Gable Media was launched sort of from Entre Architect. We've actually, yesterday was official, became a new entity, its own company. So Gable Media Incorporated. Awesome. And so Entre Architect is there, ARCAST is there, Spaces Podcast is there, Build Your Brand, Practice Disrupted, and now Troxel Podcast. And maybe someday, if we can get them to come on over, we'll get Inside the Firm on the roster.
Got to twist our arm. Got to twist all four arms. Yeah.
They want cash, I think. They want a big bucket of cash.
I think you have to twist Alex's because he's got more percentage of arms.
That's correct. That is correct.
And by twist our arms, he called us like 2 days ago, and we're like, yeah, we're in.
So if anybody wants to check out Gable Media, Gable is Gabl. Leave off the E. GABLmedia.com, and you can find us all over there.
And I want to emphasize one thing before we jump off of this is I believe, haven't done an extensive research on this, but I believe this is the only AEC focused multimedia network. So this is it, folks. Come here, come to Cable Media to get all your content. While it's a little architecture focused right now, it is branching out, and we got a lot of shows on the horizon that are going to venture out into construction and engineering and
building science.
Building science, yeah.
Talking to as well. So
speaking of that, as newest members, I'll just state, what is your guys' vision, and is there a way to maybe take this into other media rather than just podcasts?
It is planned to go video.
And perfect. So video, and then have you talked to Eric, 30 by 40?
We all know Eric well, so we haven't had those conversations with Eric yet, but
it'd be a nice addition.
You never know.
Yeah, without a doubt. We've talked behind the scenes. We've been talking about it, but we haven't approached Eric yet.
Right.
So now Eric may know that we may be knocking on his door.
Hopefully he's watching and you just broke the news.
We'll surround him.
Yeah. So Kyra is in the waiting room. So we have a few minutes before she comes in. But what else do we need to talk about? Oh, it's Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth.
I wanted to say happy Juneteenth, everyone. And for those that have joined this podcast or the feed and don't know what Juneteenth is, it is essentially the misconception is that it's the end of slavery in the United States, but that's actually not accurate. Slavery had ended 2 years prior to this date. But Juneteenth is actually the day that the last slaves, which were located in Texas, found out that they had actually been freed for 2 years, 2.5 years, I think. So this is a huge monumental day because it was the last day that the final slaves were, officially freed individuals of the United States. So it's a big day. It's been long celebrated within the African-American culture, but it's just now, within the last few weeks, start to hit the mainstream.
It is now officially mainstream.
Yeah. And I was talking off mic with Mark and Evan about this. And the weird thing is, even in some pockets of the African-American community, I think not everyone was very aware or clear on what Juneteenth was. But I went to a school that was very specific on teaching African-American history and culture. So I was clearly aware of this event in advance and for years. So it's been this weird transition for me mentally to see what I've known all of a sudden come to the forefront over the last few weeks, and for people to finally understand. And the hard thing about it, to come to realize and sort of soul search within myself, is sort of the mental break or lockdown that I have had, and I imagine others may have had, is not being able to talk about these sort of things because you're afraid of offending someone or making it an awkward situation, talking about these really heavy topics. So it's just sort of been in the shadows for so many years. So it's such an amazing thing to see sort of this watershed moment in our history where, so many things are coming to light and so many people understand what has happened over the last, really 400 years, but some of the truths of the last 50 years particularly are finally coming to light, and people are starting to open their eyes and join in on this push. And it's such a monumental year. It's been insane to see this happen. And so hopefully you didn't turn this off when I started talking about this.
I hope not, because it's an important topic. Yeah. And I mean, we're living through history right now. 2020 will be in history books, and it better be written properly.
Yeah. And that was another thing we talked about off mic, is how while in school, like I mentioned, we went over African American history, but we also had an American history book that we went through, and you put them side by side, and you could see an entire book full of content next to the American history book that so many of us have gone through, and there's like a couple pages to certain events in history. So that needs to be adjusted going forward. There's a lot of things that need to be changed and looked at again, because it's been a long time coming, and I'm glad it finally starting to get some traction.
Well, I'm running the tech side of this event here, and so I've just invited Kyra to join us, our first guest. Kyra is the founder of America's Hidden Gem, a platform uncovering the stories and works of Black architects. So welcome to ARCAST 2020, Kyra. You're muted, so you're going to have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you. We're just having a casual conversation here today. So, and Dimitrius, we should have brought Kyra in while you were talking, because that would have helped us continue the conversation, because there was no overlap here. So
yeah, no problem. Let me do a little primer intro for Kyra.
Yeah, please do.
I became aware of Kyra. She actually reached out to me to do a feature on America's Hidden Gem. And so that's how we connected initially, I think over LinkedIn possibly. So we had a few emails back and forth and answered some of her questions, did an interview with her. So she put out a nice feature, made me look better than I am. And so she's basically, I'll let her talk a little bit more about it in detail, but she's basically created this platform. And I believe she also has a podcast as well, America's Hidden Gem podcast. And she's created this platform to elevate Black voices and experiences in the profession, because as many are finding out, there's less than 2% Black population in the, or 2% Black architects in the profession. So she's helping elevate some of those stories. And one great quote that I heard was, you can't be what you can't see. And Kyra is playing a big part in bringing some of those stories to light, to help the youth understand what we can do in this industry. And Kyra, I will let you take over and explain America's Hidden Gem a little bit more.
Well, you definitely explained it very well. Most of what I would have said myself, but I guess very candidly, I'll refer back to how I described America's Hidden Gem on LinkedIn recently after my summit. I described America's Hidden Gem as being the platform for the student who is the only one in their design studio, for the student who didn't have any mentors that they could relate to, or just generally did not know. Because I mean, personally for myself, I didn't know of any Black architects until I got to college. So that was eye-opening for me. America's Hidden Gem is really for the emerging professional who is navigating their way through architecture. Personally, it's been challenging. It's been difficult, but I've managed to, basically create opportunities out of my situation. America's Hidden Gem is for those professionals who are, fighting for bids or figuring out how to create their practice. They may need a mentor that they can look to. But that is essentially what America's Hidden Gem is. It's really a platform, a space to connect people from the architects who have been practicing for like X amount of years to those who are still trying to figure out if they want to actually pursue architecture. So to me, it's just a huge family concept that I created. So. How is it
accessed? Is it a website, or how is the network built?
So I actually created the network on Instagram, but because I wanted to get the stories from each and every person, I decided to have a blog set up. So it's americashidden.wordpress.com, where I have, well, actually, let me just go ahead and give the background. So on Instagram, I have I have it set up where on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, each day is dedicated to an individual. So Mondays are Mentor Monday, where I feature licensed Black architects, designers, urban planners, or allied professionals. That's the day for them. That's where you get to see those who have been practicing for 50 years to those who have only been practicing for 5. On Wednesdays, I have this concept or idea called Midweek Motivation. So I'll drop song lyrics, quotes. If I don't know if Mr. Dimitrius caught on, but lately I've been dropping affirmations as well as my personal revelations that I may be having, and I felt that everyone could benefit from it. That's what I do on Wednesdays. And on Fridays, I have Future Architect Fridays. So for those students and emerging professionals who just recently graduated, that day is dedicated to them because, to me, I personally feel like they deserve to be recognized, because I know for myself and quite a few of my peers, it was a struggle to get through architecture. And every single person I've talked to, we've all felt alone. So to have a day just dedicated to them so they can feel seen and recognized, that's what I did. So.
Yeah. What were some of the most powerful stories that you heard when you've been doing these interviews and this whole platform?
There's actually been quite a few, and some of them it's been more so a combination of the interview and conversations that I've had with individuals. For instance, one young lady, she was featured on Future Architect Friday. I won't give people names, but through conversation with her, she basically told me that she went through architecture school and she basically decided she doesn't want to pursue architecture. And to me, that was powerful within itself, because you've come so far and you've made it, and you've gone through, the pin-ups to just the whole concept, like the whole idea of architecture school. You went through it, and for you to make a decision where you don't want to pursue it, to me, that was jaw-dropping. Mm-hmm. So that really affected me, because I was like, I feel that way too. Sometimes. Another one would be a gentleman, one of my mentors. He wrote down for one of his obstacles that, I guess after the conversion, I believe from 4.0 to 5.0 mm-hmm. or 3.0 to 4.0, one mm-hmm. of those two, he lost 6 of his 7 exams. Oh and he had to retake all of them.
Oh my God.
So every architect I've spoken to, they've told me they wouldn't want to go through that experience again. So for him to tell me that he had to retake 6 out of the 7 exams that he already took, that was, personally, people will walk away from that. Yeah. And for him to still say, hey, I'm going to keep going, I'm going to keep pursuing this, that was heartwarming. That was motivation and encouraging.
Did he happen to say why he felt that he needed to stick with it and do it again?
To say it in the most candid, frank way, without being too blunt, basically he had to get his stuff together, mm-hmm. and he knew what the ultimate purpose was to become a Black licensed architect. Mm-hmm. Like, he did not come this far to just stop.
Yeah.
I imagine that there's a sense of obligation almost when people work that far and they know there's so few, and that if they don't become one, then the number doesn't increase.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I've talked to Sandra Little, and I've interviewed her. She is the founder of Noir Design Party, a project with Karen Davis Burton in Detroit. They are doing something similar where they're documenting the history of Detroit's Black architects. And then I interviewed her again because she merged her company with Quinn Evans. Quinn Evans acquired her company, and I interviewed her. That episode hasn't come out yet. But we talked about that there's a sense of obligation almost, that you decide to become an architect, and if there's that, I think many of us, as we become architects, because it's difficult, right? It's really hard to become an architect. And so there are times in that journey where you question whether it's the right thing. And some of us say, well, maybe I'm not cut out to be an architect. And I think in a situation that we're talking about here, Black architects have even more pressure to proceed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I wanted to kind of touch back on something that Kyra mentioned where she didn't find out about another Black architect until college. It was the same for me. I knew about architecture and what it was generally. You design buildings and didn't really have any person in my mind specifically that was an architect. I knew of historically there was Imhotep, who was he was sort of a god of architecture in Egypt, and that was my guiding star from like third grade. And I actually didn't know what he really looked like, but you know so little about Black culture or Black architects. And then another example is I didn't even know until after school that there was a sponsor or a scholarship offered through AIA. So these type of things aren't really promoted and spread out because one, people that come from backgrounds with few resources aren't able to get certain scholarships or it's difficult to navigate their way through, and then they don't have the knowledge or aren't aware that certain things exist, like the AIA scholarship. So that's not promoted that much. So I wanted to mention that as well. But these type of things need to be talked about and elevated and filtered down to schools by the AIA, by NOMA. All of these conversations need to happen more actively. So,
yeah, and I think it needs to happen more consistently, because I think with the events of the last few weeks, a lot of organizations, a lot of companies are making big changes and making big gestures and making things very aware. AIA has been sending out emails and have developed sections on their website. That's great.
Yeah.
But that needs to continue. It needs to become part of our regular existence throughout all of our society. It can't just happen, once a year on June 19th, or it can't just happen when people start protesting. It needs to happen forever, right? And we all need to come together, and it needs to just be part of our existence.
Yeah. My experience with I'm glad you mentioned NOMA, because I had a scholarship through NOMA going through college. But I was also a McNair scholar, and I don't know if you've ever heard of the McNair Scholars Program, Dimitrius.
No.
So he was the first Black astronaut, and so then now there's this great foundation. So I did 2 theses as a Native American at North Dakota State, and that was really helpful. So that was I guess my shining star for seeing. And being involved with that.
But you can tell us, did you know about that until you got into college?
No.
Your high school friends that are Native Americans probably don't know about that.
No. Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm a minority in architecture, and I think that is there's nothing spoon fed to us.
Yeah.
Like, especially, but I think it's for me, I can only speak about me. For me, it's a cultural thing. Like for the family that I grew up in, I was the first to go to get a bachelor's, first to get a master's, to really go to a university. And because of the lack of experience when I went to college, and then going with mostly Caucasian folks, it was just a cultural difference of like everybody seemed a little bit more aware and more prepared.
Yep.
And I had some catching up to do. For me, it was only just cultural. It was just that I came from a very small town. It's sort of this. It's not technically an Indian reservation, but I did grow up in socialized healthcare, socialized housing, socialized medicine, a lot of stuff like that. Like we even would get $75 each basketball season for like a pair of shoes and stuff. So we just were not prepared, no matter how much everybody tried, even in high school, until we finally got to college. And then it was just an uphill battle, just kind of learning the curve of where you can go for scholarships, doing a bunch of research on your own, and stuff like that. But once I did open up all of those doors, I mean, the opportunities were there if you applied yourself, and I did. Because at the end of the day, I also got a cultural diversity tuition waiver. It wiped all of my tuition away for undergrad and grad. And then I worked my butt off and ended up actually making money with scholarships.
Yeah.
But knowing where the doors are,
to
me, is where the difficulty really lies. So.
Yeah.
I brought in our next guest, Damar Matthews. Damar, you need to unmute yourself. Hi.
Hey, how are you?
And welcome to ARCAST 2020.
Thank you.
This is a 2-hour-long conversation about wherever this conversation goes. So it's we're welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Somebody want to give? Yeah, go ahead, Dimitrius.
I asked Damar to join us. He came on my radar. He went viral with an article that he wrote. What was this? In April of last year. It's been a while. So he wrote this article called A Black Architecture Education Experience. So he just touched on a few of those things that you mentioned, Lance, about what it's like as a Black student in architecture education. And this got featured on ArcConnect and was shared widely on LinkedIn and Twitter. I saw tons of people sharing it. You happen to be releasing yours at the same time that I was about to release mine.
Yeah, I actually saw yours later, and I was like, "Who did this first?"
Yeah. So I was a few days away from publishing, and then I saw Damar's, and I was like, I gotta feature Damar or reference Damar within mine, so he knows that I came after him.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. But it was a really great article, well done, detailed his experience. But I'll give it to you, Damar, to kind of talk a little bit about what you talked about in your article.
Yeah, sure.
And what made you write it?
Well, I guess to describe the experience shortly, we were in a review, and the professor is, looking at all the work, and it was a pretty small class. So for some reason they start saying, you could be like Zaha, you could be like Frank Gehry, and they're dishing out all these, people. And then they get to my work, and they're like, you could be like Obama. I don't know any Black architects. And I'm like,
that probably didn't go over so well.
And so, you're in this weird place, because first I'm thinking, all right, what are my options of handling that? Because I'm instantly mad.
Yeah.
But it was either do it right here, direct in front of everybody. I'm like, that's probably not gonna be the best way. So we got a assignment that same day, and it was on something called Intertextuality, and it was where you can kind of blend in words that other people have said to make a new statement. It's kind of like collaging other people's words to make something. So I went and took just everything I could find from articles with people of color speaking about how they feel isolated in moments, and I sent it, because I was upset the whole night. I'm just sitting there, and luckily that was the assignment. So I did the assignment, and then separately I did a full page on just this thing, and what it was, and sent it to the professor, and they spoke to me the next day, and were apologizing and saying he realized how insensitive it was, and then said I should write about it. And so I did. And really it was just to kind of get it off, because I was still frustrated at how I had to kind of deal with this thing. I already felt isolated being the only Black person in graduate school of architecture. But then it's like just put on blast up right there, and so yeah, I was kind of frustrated, and I was just kind of ready to. It was already bubbling, so I just I just wrote it.
Did you ever have a conversation face to face with that professor after he apologized?
Yeah, the conversation was face to face when he was apologizing. They asked to meet in person, so which I respect, and our relationship is good. Now they realized, and so I don't. And it's moments like that because it could have really. I didn't know that it was gonna go that way, because the other way it could have been at my demise, really.
Yeah, it would not have been good.
Yeah, or if I didn't write this thing, that it really could have just died right there.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
And so, I'm glad I did it.
I have a question for you. I haven't read the article, but I'm wondering too if it was not only the fact that he couldn't bring up a black architect, but that
I instantly thought David Ajay. I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah, you were pretty.
I thought Paul Williams. I was thinking the whole time. I'm thinking, give me Paul.
But was it also the fact that he couldn't have said any of the regular names, like if
exactly.
It wasn't about the work.
Doesn't have to be a black architect.
You're the next Zaha Hadid, and it's a male, and it doesn't matter because it's that's just it fits the style. So was it basically both of those? Like he could have said Zaha Hadid, and that would have been fine if your style matched her style.
I would not have cared he could have said anybody, and I'd have been like, all right. But
it's weird how it wasn't about the work.
Yeah. And I mean that speaks to
so many other things.
It speaks to a lot.
Just so everybody knows, anybody who's listening live and later with the recording, I did post a link in this is live on the Entree Architect Facebook page. So you can go to the Facebook page and there's a link there. And it's also going live to ARCAST2020.com. We don't have the ability to link there, but it's on the Entree Architect Facebook page. If anybody wants to go grab a link to that.
Then I wanted to make sure that I also highlight the fact that we talked about there are less than 2% Black people in the architecture profession, licensed Black architects, but there's even less Black women. It's like just over 500, I think, right now. It's definitely under 600.
500. Yeah.
488.
Yep.
488. Oh wow. So 488. That's not okay. So there needs to be some structural changes about how we handle this stuff going forward, how we promote the profession, where we promote the profession, because a diverse, and there's so many studies that show this, diverse companies excel above any other. A diverse profession will excel. And we just have to really think about how we approach this as a profession, where we talk to people and how we talk to people. And then Kyra, I wanted to also transition to see if you had featured Damar, and if you haven't, here's Damar. You guys can connect.
I've already featured Damar. I think I featured Damar. Was it before you or after? I definitely featured Damar.
It was a while, yeah.
Okay,
yes.
Cool. Yeah. So can you guys? One story when you were talking about your review. One story that popped into my head about myself was I was also applying for art school, and I had a whole portfolio of a bunch of different artwork. And there was one page that had wrappers that I had, like a collage of wrappers that I had drawn. And the person was like, "Oh, this is really, really good. You should stick with what you know." I was like, wow, okay. Thanks for that. So same situation. And it's just so shocking that some of the things that come out of people's mouths with literally no filter, it can be astonishing. Have you guys had any, or Kyra, have you had any experience like that?
I've had experiences where they didn't come out and say things to me, but I'm always one to think of things introspectively. I was personally going through things, and they may have said something like, "Oh, well, actually, during my thesis, I found out that my aunt had cancer, but I didn't tell my thesis advisor." So we were doing pinups, and they were just going through like, "Oh, you need to fix this. This is you're behind." Just commentary that I did not have an issue with, but it got to me personally because of what I was going through. Yeah. But luckily for me, no, I didn't have anyone come at me sideways. Luckily, that's a blessing. So
yeah. Damar, you had talked a little bit about feeling isolated, and then in your article you talked about that and resources, lack of resources. Can you expand on that a little bit in this conversation today?
Yeah, I think, you know, I didn't know that I was lacking in resources, really. And I didn't know how different architecture was in terms of expenses through a semester. And so I went in, you know, I know we typically would get lab fees or something like that. So I'm thinking $100 should get me through the semester, 200, but, you know, it's gone so quickly. That money goes so quick, and everybody else in my class didn't have to work. You know, through my first year, there was no one else working, and I think that continued probably until maybe my second or third year. There were one or two other students, international students, who would work, but people could just. It seemed like everything was there. If they wanted a 3D print, I can do it. You know, I mean, that means I can wait until the last minute and get this built, and it's going to look beautiful. Yeah. Or, you know, compared to me where I was driving for Lyft right before a review to be able to get the money to print for the review.
Wow.
And it, you know, and then, you know, you already are on this grind where you're so focused to get to something, and to be ready to print and look in your account and you don't got, you know, to think about that. It makes you just want to have like a breakdown that nobody can really understand at the moment, you know, and then you need to still go and do the review.
Yeah.
But, so I think that it can hit you in sort of these different ways. Working, you know, I worked so much over architecture school, and I did that for undergrad as well, but I never realized how much it takes you away from just learning architecture in the way you're supposed to, you know. If you got to leave studio early to get to work.
The mental strain, I think that's one of the things that people don't understand is the mental strain that all of these things can have on you. I literally broke down in the middle of a Home Depot. It's very trying to have to go through that. But Lance mentioned like a bunch of the opportunities that he was able to get, financial scholarships and things like that. Why do you guys think that's an obstacle for us? Any thoughts on? Yeah, go ahead.
You want to take that first, Damar, or?
Sure. I think on one hand it is just being aware of the options. I know I wasn't aware of many options, and then when I kind of started to find out what the options were, it was like my third year, you know, or close to my third year. So I would get and win, you know, small scholarships that would kind of help, but really with $37,000 on a, you know, it's just a lot of times it's not enough if you don't know on time or know earlier, kind of know when everyone else knows, I guess.
I'll definitely agree with Damar on that aspect. Personally, I didn't become aware of architecture scholarships until like maybe either I walked into the front office and I found a book, but the scholarship was 6 months ago. So it's just a matter of finding out at the time that you actually need it. For me, because I was in grad school, I didn't find out about things until probably around my thesis year, and I'm about to graduate, but I've already done X, Y, Z. So it didn't benefit me at all. So
it sounds like there's a gap between the scholarships and the people who need them. And so there needs to be some sort of infrastructure that's put in place that can bring that. Because it's not that the opportunities aren't there. It's that you don't know the opportunities are there, right?
And that's a nod to the other issue is the education system. And the poor education system. A lot of well-funded schools are set up to groom their students for the next step. The biggest scholarship known to man, the FAFSA. I didn't find out until about the FAFSA until like the last possible second. I had just enough time to apply and got a little bit of money from FAFSA.
Which is federal tuition.
Yeah.
It's federal. It's a federal grant.
Yeah, which you would think everybody would know.
Yeah.
So there's definitely this gap of preparing students from quote disenfranchised communities of getting to that next step, and there's a lot of unknown and unacknowledged hurdles to get through. And that's the problems that people see all of these things that are out there and available, and they're like, why are you complaining? It's there. And it's like, I didn't know it was there. I don't know how to get to that.
And those are first generation student problems, you know, when your parents can't really
guide you.
Yeah, they can't guide you, and there's there's no one else that we know most of the time who's kind of trying to get through what we're doing.
I think DeMar nailed it. That's what I was fumbling to cite, is that it's just that maybe you're probably the first one to go, first minority. First, if you're a minority, you're maybe one of the first ones to go to a 4-year college in architecture, which is on the level of a doctor and an attorney and all that stuff, to go. So you just don't know. I mean, you're just kind of like a deer in the headlights, and you're just wading through the whole thing. Like for the McNair scholarship that I got, when I was doing that for 2 years, they actually had to reach out to me. And the only way they knew how to reach out to me is because I had applied for this cultural diversity tuition waiver. So then they were obviously, because you could be Black, Hispanic, Native American, any of those kind of 3 minorities, and you could get this cultural diversity waiver. So
you got on a list.
Yeah. So then you got on a list, and they called you, and then it was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I'll try that. It was extra work. It did, to speak to DeMar about, I would have had to take a job like yourself if I didn't have that extra thesis. So, but that thesis was an extra job in a way. So it like, you're still having to fill that gap. Mm-hmm. There's just no, there's, if you're a first time generation too, and then you're probably lower middle class at best. That's what I was coming up. We grew up pretty poor, and then, you don't have that backbone and that support.
And Lance and I talk about a lot. I went into the Army to help pay for it. So that's what helped me, which is a job, I guess, for sure. But there's a lot of people we talk about that don't do any of that, and they take out massive student loans. Yeah. And some of the people that aren't taking out that job too, it's like they don't realize until afterwards the burden that those massive student loans take too. Yeah. So it's kind of on both sides, and my wife almost went to one of these private schools. Not private in, like Harvard, private in, online state. I felt like they were just going to take her money, and they were actually very proactive of, saying where the scholarship are, because then they can get the government to pay for her to go. And I don't know if the universities have that ambition as much as maybe the private money-making colleges, not to put judgment on either way, but I feel like that's probably where it's lacking, at least in one part.
Yeah, I remember I took a semester off. I did summer school. So I can't remember who was talking about how you find all these scholarships, right? Specifically for minority architects or minority anybody. I remember taking 2 days in a row in between summer courses, and I would just sit there at the computer and look on Google and try to find them and start calling and stuff. So there was no real directory. And after I talked to enough people, I kind of just nudged them of like, have you guys ever considered making a directory? It would be pretty easy. We need some help here. So I don't know. I mean, maybe we should start a nonprofit, Dimitrius, and start a directory to help people. I have no idea.
There was no Google when we went to school. So
yeah.
When I was
right on the cusp of Google.
When I was applying for undergrad, I actually did my undergrad in engineering. There is a directory, but it's outdated, and I've noticed it's useless. It's useless. So I was lucky enough to be put in a position where I had like the extracurriculars in high school, and I was able to be a part of these different organizations who were able to give me scholarships. but it still comes down to those scholarships weren't enough and you still have to go out and find more, but you can't really do that because you don't have the resources. So
Yep. Let me just introduce our next guest here. And Kyra, you're welcome to stay, or you can go because you're booked for a half hour, but it's Zoom, so we can have 50 people on here. So if you want to stay and stick around, you're welcome to. And if you need to drop off, we can say goodbye.
Okay.
Laura Teagarden, welcome.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Laura.
How are you?
Hey, Evan, Cormac.
good to see
Hi,
you.
friendly faces.
Evan, did you invite Laura to join us?
I invited Laura because I haven't seen her in a while, and I thought it would be fun to talk to her. And
we missed her donuts at the expo, and so we needed to have her here.
I did not ship donuts, so
I was waiting for them. But DoorDash was ringing the doorbell.
Kira, I wanted to ask one question to you. So you've been interviewing a lot of people for your podcast. I mean, you hear Damar's story, you hear Dimitrius' story, you hear Lance's story about, not having access to, the knowledge. Do you hear that as a common thread throughout all of the interviews, that's, something that is just unavailable, or at least just unaware of?
Yes. I've noticed. I really need to sit down and go through everyone's and compile it all together. But that is the common theme, a lack of resources, a lack of knowledge, a lack of awareness. A lot of people aren't aware that there are this many Black architects. They don't know what schools would provide the best resources, what schools can actually help them with specifically, which discipline in architecture. See, I'm still in an engineering mindset, so I don't know. Healthcare, residential, I'll refer to it as disciplines. They don't know which schools offer what, but definitely it comes down to just not having a mentor. That is the number one thing I've seen across the board, is not having a mentor, not having someone that you can speak to, not having someone you can look up to, have those real heart-to-heart, one-on-one conversations with. And personally, that is it. Really, if you have someone that you can look up to, you will be able to become a licensed Black architect. So
I feel like that's a great topic to maybe shift a little into, just because now with everybody dealing from being in remote locations, and you can't actively pursue a mentor face to face, but now there's this huge opportunity to reach out, and obviously the internet makes all kinds of things possible. And one of the reasons I wanted to have Laura on this today was to talk about, she does a lot of work directly with the Young Architects Forum. She has a book that she published to help people get licensed, and speak about, that's a great topic for you, Laura, to speak directly to, is mentorship, and how I think a lot of people in the industry have become enabled to do so, to at least offer that kind of stuff out there. And then how do people get connected with other people? Other than just Googling it,
in my experience, it's the awkward first conversations on Twitter or whatever digital platform you choose.
That's how Laura did it.
It's the listening and reading and asking good questions, or sometimes dumb questions because you don't know what you don't know, and not being afraid to ask, hey, you seem to be really good at this. Can we have a more one-on-one conversation about what this means? And you start to very quickly understand the caliber of the person. If they are yes, this is all, we can set aside 15 minutes. I can't tell you how many 15-minute conversations I've had with Mark or the ARCAST guys, versus somebody who's well, I've already written about this, go buy my book. Or, so it very quickly distinguishes the people that you can tell will be good mentors versus the people who are just in it to continue to promote themselves. And to me, that makes all the difference in the quality and longevity of the mentorship too. And the other piece too that I've noticed especially with digital platforms, is it's easy to find the person who's good at the thing you're trying to learn. You don't need a mentor who covers all of the things. You need to know what you need to know in that moment, and you can cherry pick who helps you with the different things. So in my mind, there's a generation, there's actually probably about 3 of them now that are coming through with a higher level of acumen for digital media. And they're not afraid to reach out. And so it makes the mentorship shift easier on the mentee side. What we are going to need, especially in a remote work environment, is for the mentor to understand they need to reach back out. Yeah. And so that honestly is like the next hurdle, I think, from a remote work standpoint and mentorship, especially when you start thinking about remote hires. I mean, I know Mark could probably speak to this more, especially with his firm and with his knowledge of CBG and some of the inner workings of those firms. But the aspect of hiring someone on remote and making sure you just have to be a lot more deliberate with how you mentor that person. Like telling them to go watch 16 training videos for the first 2 weeks of their job is going to leave them with a completely different mindset than if you are actively participating in their learning.
Yeah.
So
quite a difference in experience. And I think that's one of the things that I am concerned about the most with offices trying to decide when to go back to the office and how many people are going to be there and who's going to be allowed to be there, what days a week and what hours. And, there's all of this logistics that people have to figure out. I keep going back to the emerging professionals who do pick up so much through osmosis of just being near people and overhearing stuff. Yeah, that's important. The ones who don't put their headphones in and just pay attention. Yeah. And that just isn't going to happen. And so now I think it just gets further complicated when you've got emerging professionals showing up to work every day because they don't want to be alone in their apartment or whatever. And then you've got these senior PAs who are like, yeah, I'm going to work from home.
Yeah.
And they don't ever meet up anymore, right? And so that has to be super intentional, like you're saying. And how do you develop a program that enables that to happen?
I think it honestly, I haven't yet decided if it levels or continues to create disparity in the sponsorship kind of playing field. Because if you have to be intentional with your staff, then you're going through a list and as firm leadership, depending on the size of the firm, and understanding, okay, who's reaching out to these different people versus it's really easy to do the kind of opportunistic sponsorship of somebody who's a principal is walking by a desk and they always stop and talk to their favorite person. So I think it could go both ways. Again, it's how deliberate do you want to be about the process?
Yeah, I think it's going to end up having to be another system that's developed, right? Because in order to go remote, in order to continue on the path that we are now on, right? We're never going back to the way we were used to work, right? That's history, right? And so now there is this hybrid of, office working and remote working. That's how it's going to be from now on. And so now these systems have to be put in place for that to work efficiently and effectively. And so that mentorship and that the internship side of it is going to have to be intentional, like you said, Laura. There's going to have to be some intentional systems put in place. Any of the business operations of a remote team is super dedicated and reliant on systems. You has to be developed and designed, right, for it to work. And so that will have to be another one, right? And I would also say for emerging professionals who, like you, Laura, who took it on for yourself to make those connections with us, right? In those early days when you were, you emailed us all the time, and you showed up on Twitter, and you showed up at the expo and introduced yourself to all of us, right? And there was so much benefit to you for that, right? To have those connections and have that network, even to this day. But that will have to happen in some of it will have to happen in other ways now. But what I would recommend for emerging professionals today is to find a community online to be active within, right? So I'm going to pitch the Entre Architect community on Facebook. It's a private community for architects. And just yesterday, I think it was yesterday or the day before, a young architect went in there and asked to be a mentor. Can somebody be my mentor? And wrote a little bit about what she was going through and why she was going through it. And she got like 80 responses to her questions and probably 50 requests to DM. Just, you just have to ask. But you have to find the right community, because some communities are not built around sharing. And that community specifically is designed to share with one another.
Yeah, thanks to you, Mark, for making it like that. I mean, you intentionally made it like that.
Yeah, well, the people in there continue. Yes, it was designed to be that way. But today it's that way because of the people in there protect that culture.
Yep.
Yeah, I would highly recommend to anyone looking for mentorship or just want to be a part of a community, just to learn through osmosis with this separation that we're going through, to join the Entre Architect community, just because there's so much good information and questions that are posed. Yeah. You may not know that you need that answer until like a month from now, but there's so much that goes through there. Highly recommend just being a part of that.
Yeah.
Sorry,
go on, Damar.
Oh, I was just saying, everybody, I think I'm probably following in Laura's track, because I reach out to a bunch of people and I never really get, I've never received no necessarily. I think you, of course, massage there you go a little bit at the first, at the beginning, but just if you're honest about what you're trying to learn, and that you respect them, then they're usually pretty responsive.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What seems to be really good about, it started from we'll be way back in the day when, like we started, meeting with Laura and people like that, is that, we didn't really realize how broad reaching the community is and how open people were to just say, yeah, come on in and have this conversation. And the thing is going back to, the earlier comment about, having access to those and understanding and knowing that community exists so that you can reach out. And so, I think it's great that Entre Architect exists, and then, having those things start to interlink with the AIA and, the Young Architects Forum, and, just continuing to push those communities out there so that they know, that those communities are out there for people. Because, the problem, we always, joke about it in the firm is like, the people who design the buildings, the people who like draw a building knows the software, and the people who design the building don't know the software, and they always have that like disconnect between the two of those. And it, that has, constantly grown, throughout the use of BIM and things like that, where, they're starting to kind of meld together. But that's a very kind of microcosm way of like the community itself. The more and more we have these platforms like Entre Architect and things like that, you start to get a more melding of sharing information from people to, we just see Patrick has just joined on all the way down to the youngest person on this call, and it's being able to like link those together, but knowing that community is there to link them together, that is what we kind of need to keep pushing.
It's a hurdle.
Yeah, and it's almost on cue with Patrick coming into the call here. Is Patrick? Let me just introduce Patrick really quick, and then we can get back into the conversation. Patrick is a former CEO of HOK, and he's also the author of this new book, which is sitting on my desk because I'm in the middle of reading it. Oh, you can't see it because it's called "Designing a World-Class Architecture Firm."
Just shake it real fast, and yeah.
And he's a great storyteller. That book is about the history of HOK and how it started, and Patrick's experience there. And he's teaching what he knows, right? He's sharing all of his knowledge. He's also a founding member of Building Smart. And so with Cormac talking about technologies communicating with one another, Building Smart is that's what it's for. And so Patrick, you're going to need to unmute yourself, but I'd love for you to just talk to that a little bit, and then we can get right back into our conversation. This is an ongoing conversation. So,
Great.
Hi, Patrick.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for the tip about unmuting. Yes, I wrote the book, and I don't have a background, so I can wave a book.
Yeah, there you go. That's what it looks like.
There's what it looks like. I wrote the book. It's not a book about the work of the firm, although that's the typical book. It's about the people and the strategies. What makes a firm go? What sustains it over now 6.5 decades? And how do you make that leadership transition from the founders to the people who follow? And in my particular case, how do you make that transition from drawing by hand on paper or vellum or mylar to working first on CAD and then using BIM tools? And those are all real interesting, difficult transitions. They're all talked about in the book.
So Patrick, we were talking about mentorship and
yes.
and how young architects can reach out to mentors and how they can do that. And now with this new environment of this virtual world that we're living in, where we have half our 1 foot in the office and 1 foot in the digital world, that mentorship becomes very difficult. Was there any sort of systems in place at HOK in order to encourage and foster those relationships with more experience?
Yes, there was and there is today. Because right now, all 2,000 HOK people are sequestered at home all around the world. And so how do you do that? And how do you stay connected? Well, we're doing it here with Zoom. HOK happens to use WebEx and some other proprietary software, but it's the same idea. You've got to stay connected and team with people and do serious work. Mentoring, I'll just tell you one small story. When I was thinking about entering architecture school, there was one architect in my hometown, not a very big town, 40,000 people. And I went to him and said, can I have an interview? Can I just see what an office is like? Well, don't bother me, Ted, I'm too busy. And I resolved, that really hurt, because I didn't know what it was like. So I resolved if I ever got in the position that he was in, I would never close my door to a young person wanting to know whether they should study architecture in school or what it was about and so on. So HOK has always been, even before I showed up, open for young people to tour. There is a paid apprenticeship or mentorship program every summer for students. And we incidentally ended up hiring, at the end of the summer, if they're graduating, we end up hiring quite a few of those young people. The other thing we have is we have an outreach to every local school that offers architecture or one of the other design professions as part of their curriculum. So we're connected to the schools, but when somebody is hired and they're brought in, coming into a firm with an office, maybe there are offices that are 200 people, can be pretty intimidating. So we assign every new employee a buddy, a mentor, if you will. And it's usually somebody that has been out of school a couple of years, that kind of knows the ropes, but they can still relate to the young person. And that buddy stays with that person for the first 6 months, takes them to lunch, introduces them around, makes them feel at home, and answers questions of what can be bewildering to a young person coming in. And how do you do this? And how do I do that? What's that for? And so on. Super important. People are everything in a practice, everything.
Yeah. I'm getting some good ideas for Entre Architect community. An Entre Architect, mentorship program where we can do those matches more intentionally inside the Facebook group.
Well, so I wanted to ask a question that kind of stemmed from a comment that Damar made about not knowing that FAFSA existed. And so Evan's kind of in this boat now. We've got, seniors in high school that, his son just graduated. Mine's a rising senior. And, we've getting inundated with all sorts of different, ways of paying for college and things like that. But the one thing, and, it's interesting that Alex has, talked about going into the Army, and I went into the Army after high school because I didn't, know what was out there to help me pay for college. The question that, I kind of want to ask maybe Patrick or Laura, is how is, say Young Architects Forum specifically, or even firms reaching out to high school communities and letting them know what kind of opportunities there are in architecture for them? Because, honestly, I knew I wanted to become an architect because, growing up just outside of Detroit, I had seen, and some people have ever listened to my podcast, I watched the Pontiac Silverdome under construction. I was like, I want to do that. But I had no clue of how to do that, even to the point where after I was getting out of the Army, I didn't have a clue of how to do that. And that seems to be a big challenge to everybody, is not knowing the path to get into that. And so, Patrick, it was interesting, is, you mentioned knocking on the door and they say, go away, kid. As a profession, obviously we need to do better reaching out, not to the college level. Because yes, we still need to do that, but we actually need to, get them young and, reach out to the high school community and letting them know what kind of opportunities are out there.
And all the high schools,
all high schools. Yes.
Yes. And I was in high school when this event happened to me, where the guy told me that he didn't have time to bother with me. I was personally involved in founding an organization called ACE Mentoring Program. You know about that?
5 years. Yeah, 5 years running as a mentor.
Okay, so it's just so I'm sure you all know about it. Then it's an outreach directly to high school kids, and it's coast to coast, and people reach out to kids to interest them not just in architecture, but also in engineering and in construction, because all three of those professions are suffering. People don't think of it as cool to enter into architecture, engineering, or construction. They want to go into high tech or something else. So ACE is intended as a way to give students a taste of this and see if it's something that would be of interest. And many ACE students have gone on then to universities or colleges to study architecture or construction or engineering. And the programs that we do with the kids are done in the offices of the sponsoring companies.
Yep.
It's usually an after-hours thing. We'll give them a tour of the office. We'll give them a job to design something or build a bridge and see how much weight it'll hold. Things like that to give them a clue. And it's fun, and the kids learn something, and they get exposure otherwise they wouldn't get.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Our office particularly works with a couple of different schools in the ACE Baltimore chapter, and a lot of students who don't even have access to understanding what an architect is, has that opportunity, or a contractor or civil engineer. Run the whole gamut of the opportunities that they would normally never, see, because they do see the more glamorous, I'm going to be this or that, and they don't really see, architecture. And so they do have that. But, I think, and I'm just curious, Laura, on in the Young Architects Forum, of whether or not there are, outreach. I know that, so one of the goals of Young Architects Forum is kind of like, okay, you're in the profession now. Let's hold on to you and let's encourage you and let you know that, some of these, hard hours and things like that aren't, that doesn't define the profession. But how are we reaching out to, the next generation, the generation that's not in architecture school yet?
Mm-hmm.
And Laura, can you talk a little bit about what the Young Architects Forum is too?
Yeah. So the Young Architects Forum is a member group within AIA National. It's a member group that serves everyone from the point of licensure up to 10 years licensed. So the National Associates Committee was founded in the early 2000s to serve all those who are not yet licensed. We serve the people in their first 10 years of licensure. So we focus a lot on mentorship, emerging professional resources, how specifically like EP-friendly firms and toolkits, things to look for when you're negotiating salaries, when you're going through the job interviews, when you're transitioning firms, how you have those conversations after you're licensed so that you hopefully do get a bump in salary. But it's also community building, and mentorship is part of that. And we have been looking in the past, and obviously recent events have more strongly pushed those efforts out to our communities about what it means for mentorship back down into the communities. The other piece to this too is at a national level, the YAF operates as kind of a leadership and guidance. So we help provide the toolkits and the resources for the regional sections, of which there are 19, and which then provide to the local components. So sometimes in regions that's really easy to do. Sometimes it's a component has a strong enough pull that there's direct link from national to local. But it is providing those resources and letting the local and regional areas implement. So it's more of a, here are the ideas, here's what's worked. So the Practice Innovation Lab, which studies the future of what practice will look like, is a good example of that. It was pilot tested at a national level. It's now been iterated in 5 different regions. So from a mentorship level, we're looking at what that means too. Last year, we actually began the pilot year for the Align mentorship program, which seeks to pair College of Fellows members with young architects in small cohorts. So like 2 to 3 College of Fellows members with 6 to 9 young architects, geography notwithstanding, it's all online, with the intent that you are paired with someone who is a fellow who has a good idea of what it means to kind of find the thread of what your passion is in your career, to help a young architect align their career with what they hope their legacy means. And obviously that's very fluid when you're 3 years into licensure, when you're 8 years, like that's going to change and iterate. But that's the pilot of that. We are looking at expanding it. We are hoping to expand it in 2021, and with the soft test at A20, which obviously didn't happen. But the goal is to continue to grow that and let that be something that regions can then iterate. Because I know that there are a lot of even local components that have good mentorship programs, and the goal is not to replace those things. It's to supplement in regions that don't have that strong of a presence. So that's kind of where the YAF is. We've also been pushing things like what Patrick was talking about, ACE mentoring. We've been pushing promotion of Michael Ford's camps, which now just went virtual. We've been pushing how to have those conversations with your firms, either to help them put their money where their mouth is, or to help them get active in the communities. And obviously promoting people who are already doing it really well. So people like Kim Dowdell with the Project Pipeline, with NOMA, people like Tiffany Brown with 400 Forward. And the understanding too is really important that it's not just high school. You need to get into K-12, because studies have shown that by the age of 10, there's already gender disparity of society as to a girl isn't supposed to be good at math and science. So how do you then start to make them feel okay as a high schooler to want to take that class? So it has to start really early. And I'm sure that Damar and Kyra can speak to similarities as it relates to that, growing up as an African American in their schools. There is that kind of what we're dealing with right now. There's societal racism. There's issues with how we fund schools. And so that's what a lot of ACE does too, is to try and break down some of those silos and get people into schools that aren't being funded well to help make sure that everyone has an understanding of what the AEC industry has available.
Yeah, and to speak to that, I think, I went to 3 high schools, because I was in my wild rebellious stage, I guess. But once I got to the last high school, I'm running out of options. It was out of my district because I was, no longer allowed in my city's district. So I went to a different school that was only 15 minutes away, but the school was completely different. I went to a largely just Black and Hispanic high school. And then when I went to this other school, it was opposite. And they had classes that I just didn't understand. I was already behind, and I didn't realize that I was so behind. And even just to get into this high school, which is kind of unheard of, I only had 1 class that transferred over from my 7 classes that I was taking at the school I was at before. And, just to think like, wow, 6 of these classes this school doesn't even acknowledge. And, that curriculum.
Yeah, I want to speak to that a little bit. I was largely in a private school for most of my K through 12 education, and there was a brief moment, 2 weeks literally, that I went to a public school, and the public school education was so far behind where I was in a private school that I got bored and I started to do bad things and run in with a bad crowd. My mom pulled me out immediately and it's like, I got to do whatever I got to do to keep you in this private school. So she switched me back and was able to, progress. But that's just a note. I just wanted to highlight that if a lot of kids end up going into these bad situations because they're bored, it's just not stimulating in these in poor or underfunded educational systems, and you just have nothing else to do. You have way too much time on your hands. So that's something that I'm sure is going to be a part of the national conversation moving forward.
I want to just bring Rosa into the conversation here. Rosa Shang, a good friend of all of ours here. But who put Rosa on the list? Because I want you to introduce her.
Guilty.
Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah.
Hi, Rosa. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So again, I think it's a similar story here. We miss you, Rosa, and we haven't got to see you in a while, and so it's just great to have you here. There's so much going on out there, and I know you've been very active on Twitter, is where I'm following along with the stuff that you've been engaging with. And I just felt, even before that, I felt like you would be a fantastic add to the show. And again, it's just more selfish than anything. Just wanted to say hi and catch up.
Hi,
so,
yeah. But Rosa, can you introduce yourself a little bit so people know your background?
I can. So my name is Rosa Shang. I became an FAIA 2 years ago, and kind of this arc of a journey in advocating for not only equity, diversity, inclusion, but now justice. So justice is now ahead of equity. So justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. It happens to spell Jedi, and people make fun of it. But may the force be with us.
That's not a bad thing.
Horrible times. But there's been a great awakening, finally, of what we started to talk about 4 or 5 years ago, and why we need equity and why it's not equality, because we have these inherent systems, racism and gender disparity and otherwise, that we just need to unpack and disrupt and rebuild. And it's really unfortunate that it's taken these tragedies that are still happening to make us wake up. But I'm relieved that we're all awake right now, and that we're going to collectively move together to save not only our country, but the planet, and in doing so, reestablishing dignity for Black Americans. And happy Juneteenth to everyone, because it's a day of liberation, and it's not just for Black America, it's for all of us.
Agreed.
So I hope that's a good starting point.
Yeah, that's a great starting point.
To keep the starting point going, do you want to kind of expand on equity versus equality, the difference?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would love to. So in a framework, and there's a meme going around, but I'll kind of be graphic in my description. In the framework of equality, everybody gets the same exact resources regardless of the outcome. So if the systemic barrier is like a fence in front of a wall and you're trying to see over the fence, if there's a tall person, a medium height person, a short person, they all get the same exact thing, the box, but the short person still can't see over the fence, which is the systemic barrier. If you look at equity, it's making sure that everybody gets what they need in order to get the same outcome, which is success. So if the tall person in that situation doesn't need the box, and they say, hey, short person needs a box in this situation, that's that equity of the resource, right? Some people need more resources at certain points in their lives. And then I get people that ask me like, well, what if thank you, you guys are awesome. What if I'm always the tall person giving away my resource? Is that really equitable? And then if I say, well, looking at where we are in the conditions of the world we are in now with COVID, with like wildfires, with like hurricanes, et cetera, we are all going to be the short person probably in our lifetime at some point, and we're going to need the resources. So do we just do a protectionist mentality of like, oh, I need to hoard the toilet paper of all the resources and lose in doing that? And we've seen what happens when we do that. Or are we going to say, no, in this certain case, I'm not the shortest person. I'm going to support that person with my resource, in trusting that when I need a resource, I'm going to be supported.
Can you be a little bit? Yeah, that was no, and plus the graphic, I think that was super helpful. Where does the equity then come from?
So in history, the definition of equity was associated with money or having a stake in the game or having a vested interest in stocks or something, right? But how we are reframing the word equity and equitable comes from higher education, comes from education period, where it was an arc from segregation. Then it was about integration and inclusion. And then equity is like the next step. And then justice is the last step, right? So that's where the history comes from, is from segregation. So equity started off as this racial paradigm of let's make sure that we're not just giving resources all the same to everybody, when we know historically the systems have created, like through redlining or through Jim Crow, they've created the systems of wealth and inequality. But how do we undo those systems? And while we're undoing those systems, how do we jerry-rig it so that we're not waiting 10, 20, 30 years for that system to get unraveled? How can we make the effective changes now? So equity, to me, and how I've defined it, and a lot of people are grabbing onto it, is identifying what the barriers are and then coming up with solutions to mitigate those barriers, right? So if we know that, let's just take an example from architecture since we're in that game, and I've heard from Damar about the frustrations of education, but cost of education, Black debt. So we did a research study, and that's online, Equity by Design 2018, where we looked at student debt across the board. Who has the most debt? Who has the least debt? Black architects, male and female, have the most incurred debt from going to architecture school, right? Barrier, right? And then when they go into the profession, historically low paid for everybody, but even lower paid, in the survey for Black architects just coming out of school, right? That's a problem. What's the value proposition of going through all that education? Yes, you're going to go save the world. You're going to have meaningful impact. But how are we supporting them if there's that barrier, which is the cost of getting into the profession, period, and then licensure? It's too much to fail, right? And then so it's paralysis of, oh my God, stereotypes, right? I got to pass all the exams or else, right? And the cost of those exams and whether or not your firm supports you, that's another barrier. So in equity, it's like, okay, what if we come up with a system, not just for Black architects, but how do we come up with a system that allows for scholarships, that allows for paying for these exams that ultimately benefit the firm when that person passes the exam? How do we create equitable solutions that, while they're helping the people that are most vulnerable, help everyone? Does that help? I know it's a long-winded diatribe.
Yeah, I'm just trying to help. I'm the type of person that needs things drilled down. So maybe I'll give you an example, and you tell me if this was an equitable, if this would fit in the category of your equitable solutions, or the way you would maybe like it to move. So I am 67% Native American, 8% Black, and 25% Caucasian. I went to North Dakota State University, and what they offered was to any minority student was a multicultural diversity tuition waiver. So everybody who couldn't get that tuition waiver, a portion of their tuition was put into a pool. So they took some of their equity, put it into a pool, redistributed it, and then I got my 2 boxes or 3 boxes, and they maybe didn't even get a box. And it put me at a level of where I didn't have the kind of debt you're talking about coming up. Is that an example?
So you've gotten money because of this scholarship or debt forgiveness concept. Is that what you're saying happened? Sorry, you said it really fast.
Okay. Yeah, I can.
Okay.
So what I received was a multicultural diversity tuition waiver. It waived my tuition entirely. So
so you had free tuition.
And did they do that for everybody or just those that checked the box?
You had to be a Native American or Black or Hispanic. It was not offered to Asian. They did not count Asians as a minority. So the way they paid for it was my counterpart, my business partner, who is Caucasian, anybody who couldn't check those boxes, they took a small portion from their tuition, equity, money, capital, put it into a fund, and then that's how I got the extra boxes. Is that an example?
That's an example.
Yeah, it sounds exactly like an example.
It's not a perfect example, but it is an example in abstract, because there's issues with that in terms of who's
offered,
and mixed race, and I know we deal with race right now as monoliths, but intersectionality is yet another complexity, as mixed races are, naturally going to happen. So who gets access to the resource? And again, you say Asian, but Southeast Asian should be considered a minority. So I think it's a concept that had warranted trying to get to an equitable solution, but there is an exclusion in not including Southeast Asians, which are Asians of color, if you will. They are in poverty lines. They fled wartime situations. They are experiencing discrimination as well, not to the same extent, right? But in terms of wealth inequity and access to education, that's something that could be fixed, right? So it's not a perfect solution. It's a asking oneself, are we doing the best that we can do? And if we're not doing that, how do we make it better?
Yeah. So Rosa, would the continuation of that analogy to create a just system for that college tuition be something like tax-paid tuition, where it then is free for everyone?
Yes. Within the government, if the government had a program where if you were at a certain income level or below your household income, your tuition would be free, right? Again, the goal is wealth inequity and righting the ship in terms of wealth inequity. And historically, it's been racialized, right? But wealth inequity affects a lot of different people. So if everybody could get access below a certain income level, that would be great, right?
Let me just introduce Amanda Gattenby. Am I saying it properly? You're going to need to unmute.
Yes, Gattenby.
Gattenby, okay. and we're just having a roundtable discussion that's going wherever it's going, and we have, and I just wanted to also let anybody because everybody was booked for 30 minutes, but we're on Zoom, so you're welcome to stick around for the whole thing. But if anybody needs to drop off, you can just wave and drop off, and we'll say goodbye and thank you. So if anybody needs to do that, you know, you're welcome to do that. Amanda, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself? And then
let me give a quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Dimitrius. Thank you.
Pre-introduction. I invited Amanda. She is a guest on Spaces podcast. We had a fantastic conversation. Gonna disrupt our conversation right now a little bit. Amanda is the VP of Development from Crate Modular, and they are shipping container creating manufacturing company. So I'll just do that as a primer, but we had a great conversation on Spaces podcast, specifically about shipping container construction. And then Amanda, you can go ahead and expand on that a little bit about yourself and Crate.
Thanks, Dimitrius. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me today, guys. I really appreciate it. I know that we can't all be together right now. So this is kind of cool, right? So my name is Amanda. I'm VP at Crate Modular. We make buildings out of shipping containers. Our recent project was a 150-bed navigation center with homelessness services for the city of Buena Park. It was made out of 48 shipping containers. We built it in 4 months in the factory, and they installed it in 4 months on site. We also have just signed 75 units for affordable housing in Koreatown, 15 units of apartments in San Luis Obispo, and we just completed some middle school classroom replacements. We like to replace a lot of the old modulars that LAUSD and some of the other larger school districts have used forever with sustainable, very structurally sound container modular buildings.
Great. Just I want to just quickly jump in here. All of the links, all of the references that we've been talking about throughout this entire conversation I've been posting them to the Entre Architect Facebook page. So if anybody is listening and wants to connect to any of these, I got as many as I could. They're in there. If anybody sees something that or sees something missing, pop it in there for us. But I tried to have everybody's links over there. So go on, Dimitrius. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I'm not really quite sure how to transition this because I didn't want to interrupt flow of the conversation. But this is just a very different one. I personally have been bombarded with questions about shipping container construction. We're going through a housing crisis, especially in California. Crate is located in Carson, California, just a few miles away from me. And shipping containers have been one solution that's been proposed, and modular construction as a greater umbrella to address the housing crisis and trying to bring costs down in these really high cost areas. And so it kind of ties into our conversation about equity and, addressing communities that are disenfranchised and trying to bring costs down to and access to resources that we all need, like housing, good education, and all the various things. So Amanda, you talked a little bit about some of the projects that you have been working on. Is there anything pop out to anybody that you wanted to hear a little bit more about? Or does anyone have a cross project that's being addressed with a project of your own that's being addressed with shipping container construction?
Or modular.
I think that container modular especially is really changing a lot of timelines. And so we can affect the construction timeline. So that is something we can do. We can produce 1,000 modules a year, which translates to 500 units of apartments in a year. So that we can do.
that we've solved for. We've actually, because we have a state approval with the factory built housing program with HCD, we're able to solve a lot of the permitting issues. So we get our plans permitted by HCD in 48 hours. The longest one has been 10 days. You still have to go through a site review, but it's abbreviated, of course, because most of the factory built portion is approved by HCD. But there are still some issues that I'm sure you guys all know about and that we could talk about things that are still holding us up in getting these projects deployed. Just because I can pump out modules out of my factory does not mean that affordable housing is actually being built at the rate we need it. My background is in affordable, so I came to modular because I had worked for 14 years for an affordable housing developer in Los Angeles area, and I thought that modular would solve a lot of problems. And it does. Construction timeline, sustainability, we can meet ADA and get factory precision. But I have no control over utility companies. Yeah. I have no control over some of the entitlement issues. I have been very grateful to see a lot of legislation around density bonuses for affordable, and we're leveraging a lot of those pieces of legislation like SB 35 and the TOC as well.
Yeah, that was one of the most fascinating parts about our conversation, was that arrangement that you have with the state for that expedited review, basically, because you have a system. And then can you explain that a little bit in detail? I believe you said that they send an inspector to the factory to review, just a kind of a spot check to make sure that it's according to the plans that you've submitted to the state, right?
That's right. It's a little more than a spot check. So it's the factory built housing program, and it is state law in California, and it's overseen by Housing and Community Development in Sacramento. It's HCD. And any portion that's built in the factory they get to review the plans and they get to do the inspections. So we basically, we include a full set of plans in our price. So we will design basically the shop drawings for the building. We really are making buildings as products. So we do the shop drawings for the building in space, and then another architect comes along and says, let's pull what catalog building Crate has off the shelf, because our catalog is expanding and expanding, and let's drop it on our lot. And then you guys would figure out the setbacks, the parking, and your local and site-specific conditions. So there is still a local plan check, but on the site plan, there's literally a grayed out box that says see state approved plans attached. And there's some memo guidance from Los Angeles DBS and some other jurisdictions that corroborate this and say, yes, this is the state law, this is how it works, and we may not require any alteration of your product either. So when we are building, HCD comes down and they inspect. When we have a housing project in the factory, they're there every day. So it's a little more than spot checking. They actually inspect every module, and every module has a state approved insignia on it before it leaves. Bye, Rosa.
Thanks for coming, Rosa.
Go ahead.
The portion of the work that's done on site is still inspected by local building authorities, and the portion of the plans that represent the work on site is still plan checked by local jurisdictions.
Amanda, has the pandemic had any? Well, I'm sure it's had an impact in the entire world. Let me rephrase that. How has the pandemic affected Crate and the way it's being delivered?
Well, I'm actually glad you asked that, because I have I think a little bit of an unexpected answer. So when the pandemic hit, the very first thing we wanted to do is protect our workforce. If our factory guys are everything to us. So there's 75. We're located in Carson on the 405 and 710, just off Dominguez and Santa Fe.
That's in California, for anybody who doesn't know.
Carson. It's a very LA statement, right? 405 and 710.
Exactly. That's why I clarified.
And so the first thing we did was split them into shifts. We went to 2 shifts. And an unintended consequence of that was we saw some factory efficiencies with 2 shifts. So the project that was in during pandemic did not slow down at all and was delivered on time, and it was the middle school in Oak Park. Now, I expected everything to slow down, right?
Yeah.
As a society and as, humanity, we're sort of slowing down, taking a breath. And
Thank you, Kyra.
What that did not happen is my phone kept ringing and kept ringing and kept ringing. And I think it's because I believe modular technology is going to move forward during this time in the same way that work from home technology is moving forward. Here we are having the conference on Zoom. But I think modular makes a lot of sense. There's the factory controlled environment. There's less subs on site. There's more of a timeline tightening up of the construction portion. And so a lot of people have been coming to me with projects that they are thinking to pivot to container modular. I've seen a few projects that have already been through planning and they're ready to pivot and look at a new way to do construction.
Amanda, one of the hang-ups with modular and a little bit with shipping container construction has always been a concern with repetitiveness and aesthetics. How are you guys working with architects mostly or with developers? And then the second part of that is how are you seeing these projects come to fruition aesthetically? Has there been variation, or do they all look like shipping container buildings?
Those are great questions. So typically my clients are developers. They're looking at this as a methodology, but I see us as just a different building type. And so we love to work with all different architects. There's usually a design architect or an AOR on the project that's separate from our in-house architect that creates the shop drawings. And that's so valuable because we get to see how different architects and designers treat our medium, right? So that's been wonderful. We do want to encourage replication. So every time we get a project approved, a building approved, we now can build that building for the next 3 years in our factory, and it has a state approval anywhere in California. So I really encourage everybody to kind of shift, and instead of saying, okay, every single piece of dirt needs a new and unique plan for it, versus what is this catalog of buildings that we have, and where are the right lots to put them? Mm-hmm. And every building can be skinned. We have a lot of exterior cladding options. Sometimes you would not believe that it's the same building in a different place because it looks completely different with cladding. Yet another design challenge. It's like Project Runway up in here. So we like to encourage replication, and we have an off-the-shelf menu, because if we really do want to get serious about deploying more units of affordable housing in 2020, there's time. I have 6 whole months. I can build you 250 units. Yeah. So let's look at the ones I already have. Let's cut some design time off, and let's get creative about replication in a good way.
And you mentioned earlier about the hang-ups. What's kind of one of the leading hang-ups for this deployment of modular and shipping container construction?
Frankly, lenders. Not a lot of lenders are super comfortable with modular yet. Not only container modular, but other types. They're getting there. I do believe that modular is the future, and a lot of people are starting to get on the train. There are certain lenders that have come to me and come to us and said, hey, we're interested in this type of thing, and what can you do? And every project brings us, developers bring us their relationships with the banks. And so we get a chance to show them what we can do and how it works. Just the structure of typical construction loans may need to be modified to account for the fabrication money.
Gotcha.
All right. I just wanted to introduce Bill Janot from ARCAST, who's the latest guest here. You're going to unmute. There you go, Bill.
Hi, everybody.
How are you?
I see a lot of familiar faces.
Yeah. Do you like our backgrounds?
I love them. There's
take you right back home, right?
My goofy brother behind Cormac.
I think that's you between Lance and Alex too.
Anybody who doesn't know, that's Roman Mars from 99% Invisible.
Oh, cool.
And
there's Evan.
That's Evan. I have a question for Patrick in terms of Amanda. What Amanda's talking about in terms of modular building, and you're a founding member of Building Smart. Is any of the technology with BIM and all the other things that Building Smart is working on, maybe you could actually even talk a little bit about what Building Smart is for anybody who doesn't know, and how that might integrate with modular building?
Yes, that's a great question. I do think that modular or manufactured buildings are certainly in our future. And Building Smart, which I helped to found 25 years ago, is not a modular building maker. It's a nonprofit international digital standards body. So Building Smart makes and offers standards to integrate softwares for free. So my software speaks French, yours speaks English. Building Smart has a piece in the middle. I can talk French to this thing, and you'll hear English. We fully exchange data and information with the softwares that way. So what does that mean? Whether you're building traditionally or whether you're building, which I believe we will all do, just think about it this way. I'm listening, Amanda, to what you had to say. I would have put it in a broader context. Buildings are not constructed anymore, really. They're assembled. They're assembled on site. The general contractor is a bit like General Motors or Toyota, where they're assembling a building on site. The materials for the building are brought by truck. They're pre-manufactured by thousands of different manufacturers of building products. We don't typically, unless it's very special or unique, we don't build buildings one stone or one brick on top of another at a time. We would never be able to take care of our needs. So in my mind, it's if you accept that buildings are, and there are thousands of examples, all the buildings that all of us are using or that we design contain windows and doors that are manufactured by somebody, and plumbing fixtures and electrical fixtures and sheetrock and et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of modular is simply an extension of this, where you're taking a bigger assembly of materials that's actually in a self-contained structure. It works really, really well for a project like housing, where the modules are big enough for someone to live in. It may not work well for an airport or something else, but the idea is the same. So I think our future is highly collaborative, like we're doing today, where we're all sharing full information with software, where we're assembling buildings in factories first, either buildings or components, as big as we can get them on a truck, and shipping them to the job site where conditions are often, except in LA, conditions around the rest of the world are not very always conducive to construction. So where the components are assembled in a factory condition first, and then simply lifted into place at the job site. Whether that's a whole module like Amanda's speaking of, or big components. Using BIM tools now, we've seen electrical mechanical contractors because they get really confident about the exact dimensions of, let's say, a plumbing tree. They're assembling plumbing trees that are a whole floor, and they bring it in a truck as big as they can get it on the highway, and they lift it into place, and you know what? It works. So I think it's the wave of the future, and And it will be our profession's contribution to finally getting the art of building into something that's akin to more like a manufactured. The only thing I'd pick at that Amanda said, and I get what she said, why she said it, is I still think of a place for someone to live as a house or an apartment, not a product. But other than that one small semantic, I totally agree with it.
So what do we, and this is to everybody on, so what do architects need to do to bridge that gap and sort of get ready for this new future? And that also applies to technology too, but a possible modular future and technology. What do we need to do to get there?
Well, it's interesting is, so, prior to resettling to the DC area, when I was in Florida, we did quite a bit of kind of custom modular homes, worked with custom manufacturers and basically used their template of, how to design and build a building and then bring it out onto site. In 9 times out of 10, it was a much better constructed building because we could, because of the cost differential between, building it on site and dragging the construction out to a very long, timeline, you're actually able to put that cost back into the building. And, you're able to, say, because I was building to a 155 mile an hour wind zone, I needed to, I was 1-for-1 with custom homes versus this, versus, a modular home, but I was actually being able to deliver the product faster and cheaper at that time. The problem was, so I was walking around a house that, if you did not know that it was a modular house, you would have guessed. It was a, beautiful shingle-sided house, and one of the people who were walking around, because they knew it was modular, they immediately said, "Oh, tell me why this isn't a trailer." It's the stigma of modular houses, whether it's shipping container or factory built. Everybody has the stigma that it's this cheaply done thing, and it's just absolutely the opposite. Rather than building on site with 2x4s, I was building in a factory with 2x6s, and I was able to meet higher wind speeds at roughly the same cost because I was able to reduce the on-site construction costs. I mean, the longest thing that took to build some of the houses that we built were going through the site permitting process and getting the foundations built. I mean, those actually took longer than the 10 to 14 days that it took us to build a 2,500 square foot home. But there was the stigma behind that issue of oh, this is a modular home, this is a trailer park, and it was just the opposite.
Yeah. I wanted to squeeze you in, Bill, to talk a little bit about ARCAT and the resources that you guys are providing there with ARCAT.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about it.
Well, we have a whole bunch of giant libraries of building product information, CAD details, BIM objects, BIM systems, videos, thousands of catalogs, and a great search engine that sits on top of all this. So if you need a spec at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, you can go to arcat.com and grab something that'll work for your project.
And you guys, some of the details and things, they're from manufacturers, right?
Yeah, everything we offer is from the manufacturers. So what you're getting is super accurate right around a specific product.
Are you guys tying into any modular manufacturers yet?
No, I don't think so. Let me just do a quick search, but I don't believe so.
Well, Amanda, meet Bill. Bill, meet Amanda.
Thanks, guys. I knew this would be productive.
I think Crate Modular would fit very well on arcat.com.
Oh, definitely. Let's see if you're on here. Crate Modular.
Let me just insert something, and then I'll have to excuse myself. This is Patrick.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick.
About people having perceptions about modular construction. before Henry Ford invented the production line, the assembly line, cars were built in backyard garages one at a time by people that were called mechanics. And the thought was that the only really good car is one that's handmade. And I can still remember my grandmother saying, you know, if you want the best, you got to get something that's handmade. And nobody would imagine saying that today. So it is a perception. I mean, here, I've got something that's definitely not handmade right here that we all use. And you know what? If it was handmade, it would cost $1 million each and nobody could afford it. Bringing something into affordable range so that everybody can have a house, everybody can live nobly and well, and everybody can go to school in a good, safe, clean school classroom, etc. Those are dreams that are still out there, and we have to fulfill that. And I don't think it's just modular. I don't think there's any magic bullet. I think it's all of it, everything that's been discussed here.
Yeah.
The one thing I'd like to leave you with is, if you squeeze design out of it, you've taken the heart and soul out of it, because the built environment should have design at the center. And that's the piece where the architect has to really work to stay in the game here.
Right.
Because it's too easy for someone to say, well, I can go order up a new school classroom or a new home from XYZ. Why do I need you as an architect? And that's more time than you'll have, I think, in the rest of today and all day tomorrow. But
yeah,
that is the key to this. It's not modular versus hand built or something like that. It's
right.
Good design is good design, whether it's made in a factory like this thing or whether it's a modular construction built in one of Amanda's factories. So I'm gonna excuse myself, but I've enjoyed it, and thank you all very much for having me on.
Thank you for coming, Patrick, and thanks for sharing your knowledge.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Yeah, I think that's going to be sort of one of the things for architecture as a profession to step forward and understand this profession has drastically changed and is drastically changing as we speak.
Oh, yeah.
And we have to step ahead as leaders to sort of help navigate, because we've, for a long time, designed to the 1% and have to shift to design and help serve the other 99% as a profession. So I think,
and if we don't, architects become obsolete.
Exactly.
Because somebody else will.
Well, you know, I mean, it goes back to the conversations that Evan and I've had, you know, numerous times about, and this was something that I heard from, you know, Robert Ivy, I don't know, when I was, maybe a sophomore in college, when he had talked about the staggering small number of buildings that are designed by architects throughout the country, and how, you know, the more and more we become, you know, I guess stigmatized as the expensive option, you know, the less and less people are to come to us. And so they are turning to modular options and things like that. And so Patrick's absolutely right that, I mean, modular is definitely a good way to go. It's just, you know, making sure that we contain the design aspect of that. And that's where, you know, he's right. Architects can leverage us to being able to, you know, bring something, you know, something more affordable that's, you know, easy, quicker delivery, but is also, you know, beautifully designed.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to respond.
Go ahead.
So we are nothing without architects. We are simply, I mean, we're a factory. We make parts. It's up to you guys to put these parts into something beautiful. And we're just a new material for you to do your work with. But we don't exist without architects. Like, we know how to build things. You know, we know how to run plumbing and we know how to run electrical in between shipping containers. So we need architects. And so every project that has been successful of ours, there's been an amazing architect behind it every single time. And then even if we are replicating something, like in my catalog, that architect now has a chance for his work to be replicated and reused. And there's a chance for a design architect to come on the outside and say, okay, this is what we had. How can we change it and turn it into something else? For instance, I have a line of ADUs, accessory dwelling units. And my first one is the Lehman ADU, because it was designed by Mark Lehman from Lehman Architects. I want to have a catalog with 20 different versions, with 20 different architects and 20 different aesthetics. And I want you guys to help me showcase our material and to see, what we can do with it. You guys have done so much with sticks and bricks. What can you do with shipping containers?
Yeah. So any of the architects out there listening who want to connect up with Amanda, Crate Modular, the link is on.
We'd love to have more and different architect design, high design ADUs.
Cormac, you want to wrap things up?
Well, I was just going to tell Amanda that, one of the, the interesting things that I seem to always find with architects is there, as much as there's a stigma about modular buildings and things like that out in the world, it's also a stigma within the profession of like, why would I go to a modular building rather than, something that I can design myself? And, and so it's this just kind of like cyclical thing where, people are trying to avoid the inevitable, which is, just embrace all of the different tools, just like BIM, just like, we still hand sketch, but we also, design with, BIM tools and things like that, and so
I think that's a common theme for our entire conversation from beginning to start. The world is changing, the profession is changing, and is changing rapidly in every aspect, everywhere you turn. Right. And if you do not embrace the change and take hold of it, and become part of it, you're going to be left behind in everything that we talked about today. So I just wanted to wrap things up. We're past our time here. I wanted to thank everybody who was here today: Kyra Williams, DeMar Matthews, Laura Teagarten, Patrick McLamey, Rosa Shang, Amanda Gattenby, and Bill Janot from ARCAT. All of us, we thank you, Bill, and ARCAT so much for all the support that you've given us as a community over the years at ARCASpeak, at Inside the Firm, Spaces Podcast, Entree Architect, and all of the architects. You and your team at ARCAT have done so much for us in terms of support, both technically as well as financially. So thank you very much for doing that, and hence the ARCAST 2020. So thank you, Bill.
It's our pleasure.
All right, so thank you all for a very, very interesting conversation.
Absolutely.
Very powerful from beginning to end. It is available on Facebook at Entree Architect Facebook page. So if you can just go to the page, you'll find it. All the links of everything that we talked about, I tried to put there, including the links to all the podcasts that we're all from. If anybody wants to go subscribe to all of our podcasts, that would be helpful. ARCAT.com. You can go to ARCAT and check out ARCAT and everything they do. Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Gable Media.
Thank you.
Yes, Gable Media.
Don't forget to pitch that.
You could just go to Gable Media and we're all there. So we have ARCASpeak and Spaces Podcast and Entree Architect Podcast and Build Your Brand Podcast. And now Practice Disrupted with Evelyn Lee and Janine Chastain. And Tuesday, it's launching Troxel Podcast.
Oh.
That's what you want to listen to. It's all about the technology and the future of technology and architecture. Troxel Podcast. You can find it all at gablemedia.com. It's GABL media.com. GABL media.com. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
This has been really fun. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
You're going.